Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Policy and Resources Committee, which has been conducted from the Chamber and remotely through Microsoft Teams. Translation facilities are available for this meeting, so please ensure that you have your headsets if required. The instructions for translation facilities, if joining remotely, are in the Teams invite. Please ensure your microphones are off, and before we begin, I will ask Councillor Donald Crichton to lead us in prayer.
Our gracious God, we give thanks for your goodness to us this day and for all the mercies we receive from your hand. We acknowledge that you are the giver of every good and perfect gift, and we give thanks for the gifts and resources that you have afforded to us, and we pray that you would give us to be good stewards of all that we have been given to take care of. Give thanks, gracious God, for our organisation, and give thanks for all that we seek to do for our communities and for the people who live in our islands and whom we seek to serve. We pray that you would bless us in our economy, in every aspect of our social lives and in health and social care, that you, God, would bless us and keep us and bless all those who do all they can and use all their skills and talent to the service of the public. We pray that you, God, would bless us then as we gather together at this time to meet as a committee of policy and resources, that you would bless us in all our endeavours and deliberations, grant us wisdom and give us to be able to discuss things honestly and with integrity, and also in friendship and in comradeship. We ask, gracious God, that you would bless the chair, the leader of the council, vice chair, and all who have political responsibility at this time, and those who have executive responsibility too, that you would bless them and keep them in the responsibilities and duties that they have. We pray now that you would go before us and keep us, and remember those who are in need of you, those who mourn at this time, who have been bereft in recent times, both belonging to us as an authority and out with, that you, God, would bind up their broken hearts and keep them. We ask now that you would go before us and bless us and pardon our sin for Christ's sake. Amen.
Thank you, Councillor Crichton. The meeting is now being recorded and will be made available on the Corniers website following the meeting. Item 17 will be taken in private at the end of the meeting, and I'm ruling items 5, 10, 12 and 18 as urgent to allow the matters to be considered prior to the next meeting. Item 1 is the minute of the meeting of 21st September, and that's for approval as to accuracy. Approved, thank you. Item 2 is declaration of interests. If you're invited to declare an interest in any agenda item at this point. If you become aware of any interest during the meeting, then I would ask that you declare it at that time. When declaring an interest, it would be helpful if members could indicate briefly the nature of that interest. This helps to make our decision-making more open and transparent for the public. Item 3 is the minute of the meeting of the Outer Hebrides Community Planning Partnership of 17th March 2022, and that's for noting. Thank you. Item 4 is minute of the meeting of Committee in Gaelic on 8th November 22, and the minute is for noting. And items 3 and 5 are the recommendations for approval. Approved, thank you. Item 5, minute of the meeting of the Community Safety Board of 23rd November 2022. And again, the minute is for noting, with items 3, 5 and 7 are the recommendations for approval. Approved, thank you. We'll move on to item 6, that's performance monitoring 22-23 for quarter 2. And the following report provides an overview of the business plans and related performance issues at the end of the second quarter of 22-23. We have Malcolm Bauer, Norman MacDonald, Ian McKinnon and Callum McKeever to highlight key points and answer any questions in their respective remits. So I'll ask the Chief Executive if you'd like to go first. Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be as brief as I can, looking at the length of the agenda, but in terms of summary, the business plan, I think you'll find performance there entirely healthy. We have 33 actions and 29 key performance indicators, and 32 of the 33 actions are on track. And the one that isn't is showing amber. That's just about corporate travel, which isn't surprising as business returns to hybrid life rather than normal life as it was after COVID. Inevitably, the number of events has risen. Just on that point, though, I have made representations to Scottish Government about the need to offer hybrid meetings wherever that is possible. There was a slight irony this week when a national meeting on digital strategy is in person only, and there is, I have to say, no need for us to attend that in person. There are meetings you do need to be at in person, but that wasn't one of them. So it's to be hoped that everyone reverts to hybrid rather than to either in person or online only. So we're keeping a very close eye on that action, of course, but everything else is in order. KPIs, 9 on track, 1 off track, and 19 of them are annual. And you can see details about all of these in the reports themselves. Moving on to the paragraph 7, to the benchmarking priorities. 2 of these are prioritised by the Corla in my department, and these are sickness absence days. Now, these are not, of course, just for my own department, they're universal. And the gender pay gap, the details are set out there, and I won't go through them, but you can see the increase in sickness absence, which is common across Scotland, and the vast majority of that is short-term sickness absence. The details are set out in 7.3. I suspect it is very much to do with medical advice and cautiousness about being at work with any symptoms that could be perceived as COVID. This is an issue across Scotland. Hopefully it will, that figure will reduce, but we are, like all authorities, monitoring that very closely indeed. Gender pay gap, we continue to make progress. Paragraph 9 on budgets, as you would expect, we expect to come in as a department on budget. So moving to paragraph 11, the key policy areas. Some of these are on the agenda already, so I won't go through them in detail. Some information there on data returns. So what you think, that's the job, but there's a lot of them. So councils are responsible for 127 corporate returns to Scottish Government, to Public Health Scotland, to SEPA, and we have an additional 30 reporting duties for publishing on websites. So it's just useful background information to you that you know that, because that's a lot of work. Some of them absolutely essential. I would say some of them perhaps less so and could be made less onerous. But just to let you know that that's the level of reporting duties which councils have to undertake. Digital strategy is elsewhere on the agenda, as is energy and climate change, as is growth deal for the islands. All of these are the subject of concurrent reports later on the agenda, which takes us to 11.9 and National Care Service. Much going on with National Care Service. There have been a lot of representations, to say the least, to Health and Social Care Committee of the Parliament on the current bill, and a lot of these are entirely supportive of our agreed position. That is the united position of all professional consultees and a number of political consultees, and interestingly a number of third sector. So while recognising there is a wish and a need to change practice and funding for social care, there is a strong feeling in line with our own representations that there may be other options for doing that. And I've set out in 11.10 and 11.11 the Corla's position there, that if the bill goes through as it is, it would make the implementation of Christie principles and other public service reform, which the Corla supports, very difficult indeed. Turning to public service reform itself, you're all aware of the work which we submitted through the review of local governance. Suffice to say there will be more on this, I think, very soon. That work is back on track within civil service. I expect that there will be a political meeting to follow either before Christmas or early in the new year. And that's very important work for this council, not just in terms of empowerment and local governance, but in terms of finance. And I will be speaking to you all, presuming that all this comes to pass, about how we take that forward actively, because there will be a resource required to do that. Finally, Chair, cost of living. As you know, we had well-developed proposals which we were about to put into place when there was a welcome announcement of a fund of 1.4 million from Scottish Government about a month ago. And of course, it was necessary that we saw the details of that, the distribution of it and the criteria for its disbursement before we finalised our own scheme. Now, the details are not finally clear, but one hurdle was passed last Friday when COSLA leaders approved the distribution methodology for the fund, which will be essentially pro rata population of islands. Now, that includes islands connected to the mainland by a bridge, so that includes Skye and I suppose Seal and Argyll, but essentially it will be distributed pro rata among the the population of islands. So it will make our share of that 1.4 million. I won't anticipate the maths, because you know what I'm like about figures, but there will be a substantial sum available to supplement, I think, to supplement the scheme which we have put in place. As to criteria, it appears that the criteria will be relatively light touch, and we will be able to add that sum to our own scheme and distribute it, obviously in an accountable way, along the lines we see fit. So I think the timing of this is actually very good indeed, because many of you are aware we have just released the LACER funding, the LACER funding, through third sector interface. By the time that is spent and distributed, our own fund, I think, will be ready for distribution. We have Norman MacDonald and I are working on an application form which will be as simple as possible. That will be ready within the next week or so. I will write out to you all again to advise of what I've just stated once I receive that in writing from Scottish Government, and I will ask for your final view on whether we just add that sum when it comes to the schemes we've already talked about and more or less agreed. So I think that would be the sensible course of action. That would make our own funding simply last longer. Nothing else to report on the department, Chair, but happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. Any questions or comments from members? Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Chair. Not a member of your committee. Just to ask the Chief Executive on the cost of living funding, the final item we discussed there. Could it be then that we're going to be into the beginning of the year before we're able to put applications into our communities? Because, as you know, I'm speaking of the Lochs area in particular, where we've got a project ready to run, and we have had for quite a few weeks now. And one organisation within the three that we're talking about has actually started doing some work on there, and they've had additional costs come in. So we've had a bit of a delay in getting something to them. So I just wonder, are we going to be into how quickly what the process would be, and how quickly would be to get some of the money or the applications filled in to apply for the money?
The intention, Chair, is to move us as quickly as possible. And as I've said, the application form is just about ready. I will ask Mr. MacDonald if he wants to comment on timescales, because it is his department, which will be his service, which will be disbursing the funding. But there is perhaps an advantage from my perspective that if our funding begins as early as possible in the new year, that perhaps continues the LACER fund continues where the LACER funding will tail off, and we know that the early new year is a time of particular financial pressure. But the aim is to move the funding out as quickly as possible. But maybe Mr. MacDonald can assist there.
Norman.
Thank you, Chair. The application form is ready to go, really. So if members are of a view that they want to start as soon as possible, and there's projects that are waiting to go, I don't have a problem with letting that start.
In view of that welcome news, Chair, I think we will move as quickly as possible as soon as we receive the letter from Scottish Government about the 1.4, which is anticipated very soon, because we already know what will be said, but we need to have confirmation, of course, of what we will receive. So as soon as that's done, I think we can, if it's the mood of everyone that we move as quickly as possible, then we will do so.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Thank you, Norman. I think the feeling is that we get moving on this as soon as possible and get the money into the communities. Councillor Morrison.
Thank you to bring me back in. Just a supplementary to that, is it possible to maybe get an application form so that we can actually take it to our communities and have it ready to run, filled in and ready to run when we're ready to hit the ground running?
Yeah,
If it's ready, we can, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll get that. I got a nod off Norman as well, so we'll take that forward. Probably towards the end of this week. I think there's quite a bit happening. So if that's okay with you. Tomorrow's fine, he says. Thank you very much. Next up is yourself, Norman, if you could give us an update on the strategic finance, accountancy and exchequer services.
Thank you, Chair. This is a fairly standard report from us. As usual, we don't really have any development tasks. There are two main targets around the completion of the annual accounts and the audit, which was signed off at the end of October. And the other one is the budget process, which we're well into now and progressing. The remaining targets are really around the achievement of business plan savings and some clearing up of some audit recommendations. And these are generally making good progress. There's probably one that isn't progressing as we would want, which is a participatory budgeting. Still needs a bit of development. We're doing bits of it, but we don't have a full process in place. But we're not alone in that. I think most councils are struggling with the participatory budgeting. In terms of benchmarking, we've carried out an exercise on the invoices PI, which performance had gone down on. We've identified the areas where there are issues, and the staff are working with these sections to see how they can sort of remedy the problems with late payment, things like that. On financial performance, the sections are expecting to be within tolerance at the end of the year. There will be an underspend on the director's cost centre, but that will be returned to the general reserve. So apart from that, there's nothing of note. So happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Norman. Any questions or comments from members in the chamber or online? No. Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to, oh, sorry, Councillor Crichton.
Just very quickly, I mean, Norman mentioned participatory budgeting. Yeah, and I think that's something that was probably blown off course because of COVID and the like. I mean, I think when we were doing a lot of public engagement around transformational change, that was a route that we were looking to take in terms of given the planning budgets we have and trying to involve our people more and more in the decision-making process. And so I think it's something that we need to pursue and develop. So it'd be a really useful tool to give us a steer, you know, as members and officers on where the people are feeling about public finances.
I agree, Donald. Yeah, I'll bring in Chief Executive.
Yes, Chair, absolutely. It's very much.
Oh, hold on, sorry, Malcolm. Yours up now. There we go.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, very, very much a subject of discussion and management team at the moment. And I don't want to sound mysterious, but yes, we have a few ideas, I think, where participatory budgeting would be not just appropriate, but very helpful. And I will discuss these with all of you as soon as possible.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Yeah, I agree, Donald. It's something we did previously, and I think it worked quite well. In a previous, before I was a councillor, we did a bit of work with the youth and newest, and it was an excellent project. So yeah, it's definitely worth looking at again. And COVID was a bit of an issue for us. So thanks for that. Were you finished? Any other questions or comments for Norman? Sorry, no, I couldn't see. Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I don't know if this is the right time in this particular meeting to ask this question, but I suppose since Norman here talking about budget, the island deal, the number that was agreed at the beginning of the process.
I think we've got an island deal report on the agenda.
Will it be later on? I'll ask it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do. Yes. Yes. Just checking. That's okay. Yeah. Okay. That's okay. We'll move on to investment delivery. That's Mr. McKinnon. Yep. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So the report follows the normal format, and you'll see that the revenue expenditure, with regard to revenue expenditure position at the end of September is summarised at paragraph 8.1. And we currently envisage the year-end position being well within the whole year budget of £52,000. There have been no formal complaints in the year to date have been dealt with by Investment Delivery. And of the 4 main projects originally within the remit of Investment Delivery, of course, the Benadryl project is now complete, and progress updates for the 3 remaining projects are included in Appendix 1 to the report. Looking at Goat Hill first, the recent completion of the final phase of the 74 affordable houses at Sinclair Avenue by HHP and OMAC Construction marked a major milestone in the wider Goat Hill project. And with regard to the social care facilities, they're of course being delivered by the Waits Group and McLaughlin Harvey on behalf of ourselves and HHP. Steady progress towards completion is being made, although, as you will appreciate, for such a large and complex project at this crucial stage of construction under the recent and current circumstances, the contractor continues to face a number of challenges in getting it across the line. He's now forecasting a planned completion date of the 23rd of January 2023, and Investment Delivery continue to liaise closely with colleagues in health and social care, property and infrastructure and HHP in coordinating the handover and operational commissioning of the facilities, which will take about 4 to 6 weeks after the construction process is complete. And based on those current milestones, we now envisage the transition of service users from the existing care homes at Dunberris and Dunashton being in March 2023. Regular reports regarding the operational commissioning of the new facilities, including issues associated with workforce planning and communications with staff, service users and their families, continue to be provided to the IJB, with the next meeting being on Thursday the 8th of December next week. There are some progress photographs included in the appendix to the report for your interest. Baron Vathter say there's a more detailed update on progress later on in the agenda, and I'll talk to that report later on in the meeting. With regard to Lochmaddy, progress with regard to the various elements of the project which are listed in the report are making reasonable progress rather. Certain aspects of the construction works are, however, being hampered by a number of factors which are out with the control of the delivery team and the contractor, mostly the works to the pier itself and to the works to the caisson, which is temporarily located elsewhere within the harbour. The installation of the permanent fenders and other deck furniture to the caisson faces a number of technical and operational constraints, such as tidal conditions, inclement weather, reducing daylight hours at this time of the year, and increased ferry movements within the port due to the temporary closure of the Loch Boysdale link span in October. And all this has been having to be managed whilst minimising the risk of disruption to the Lifeline ferry services. We now envisage the caisson being moved into its permanent location at the end of the existing pier during the month of January, and we will of course continue to liaise with CalMac to ensure any risk of disruption to the ferry service, which would generally only be at times of inclement weather, is kept to a minimum. And we will, in any event, continue to provide updates to the local community in the coming weeks as a final date for the movement to the caisson to its permanent location is identified. And with regard to the wider project, as an update to the date suggested in my report, we now envisage the project being substantially complete in April 2023. And again, there are some photographs in the appendix to the report for the interest of the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ian. Any questions or comments? Councillor Racine.
Thanks very much, Ian. In view of CMAR's latest decision, obviously about the new ferries, the Isla style ferry, and will there be implications to the work that's been done on the pier? Will there be any additional cost to what's already been committed?
Yeah, there will probably be issues around what we call vessel fit, between what the pier has been designed for. Of course, the works to the existing pier were designed to accommodate vessel 802, as it's called at the moment, and the new vessels, the new sort of Islay class vessels, are a different size, different shape. So there will be some issues in terms of vessel fit. That work is the work to identify those issues is ongoing. In fact, we've got a meeting of what's called the Sky Triangle Steering Group to talk about this particular issue the beginning of next week, which will involve myself, but also Kenny Morrison, the Cornwall Harbour Master, as well. In the meantime, Transport Scotland have told us to keep going with the project as it is at the moment. They had some work done last year which looked at very high level vessel fit issues, and they didn't see any problems with it at the time. But there will have to be a lot more detailed work done over the coming months and probably years between now and when the new vessels arrive. In the meantime, the message to ourselves from Transport Scotland as we carry on with the project as has been proposed. I don't think the new vessels are scheduled to come along until 2026-ish is the word that I've been told. So we've got a bit of time yet to work with CMAL and ourselves as the Port Authority in that regard.
Can you put yourself and I'll bring Mustafa back in. Mustafa?
Would there be a case, would there be an impact on obviously the expectation of finishing the project in April? Or would there be, if there is future adjustment to do to the pier, would that be, or do we foresee closures as well in the future or something?
We've been told at the moment just to carry on with the scope as it is just now. By way of an example of where there might be issues, which I think we will have to pick up sooner rather than later, is that the power demand for the newer vessels, we're aware, is slightly higher than the power demand that you would have expected from the 802. So what we might have to do, even at this stage, is work with Scottish and Southern to upgrade the size of the substation and maybe the cables feeding that. But in terms of vessel fit, the mooring lines, the berthing lines, that kind of thing, that will continue as we've planned. The design is such that it was designed for the 802, but will obviously accommodate a range of vessels, not least the Hebrides in the short term. But as I said, again, the message from Transport Scotland is carry on with what we've got just now. If there is to be any further changes in years to come, then as some of the new members might not be aware of the fact, is that all the works that are being carried out for Lochmaddy Pier at the moment are being funded directly and indirectly by Transport Scotland. So the project is actually cost neutral to the council, and if there were any alterations required in 2 or 3 years' time to accommodate the new vessel, then we would hope that that principle would carry forward as well, and it would continue to be cost neutral to the council as that.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah. Going to come in. Thanks, McCoy.
Thanks, Chair. Not a member of your committee. Thanks for the report, Ian. Going back to the care home, have we got a name for the new care home yet? It's a matter of interest.
2 names. The Housing with Extra Care, which is actually owned by Hebridean Housing Partnership, and that's used for more independent living. That's called Bremner Court. And the care home, which will be owned by the council and operated, in fact, both facilities will be operated by the IGB. That's going to be called Tyhee for.
Any other questions or comments? For Ian? No. Thanks very much, Ian. The next item is Deputy Chief Executive, but deputising for the Deputy Chief Executive is the Chief Executive. Welcome.
Yes, Deputy. Here, Mr. McKeever is at the Scottish Digital Conference, which we would have liked to have been able to attend digitally, but there we are. So I will do the best that I can with the report. Some key updates. Again, the actions and the performance indicator, the information is set out there. The 2 that are red are in the culture and heritage section, and that is simply due to prioritisation. But now we've appointed the heritage and culture manager. I think these will move forward as quickly as possible. Just on the service highlights are set out at 6.3, but just to let you know, UIST Unearthed, which is the digital UIST virtual archaeology project, has once again achieved another award, but a magnificent award, really. That's the That's UK award for outstanding archaeological achievement, and that was presented in Dublin Castle yesterday, so it may be UK and Ireland for all I know. But the message there for us is we all know the archaeological riches of not just UIST, but of the whole Western Isles. That project would not have happened without a modest but vital contribution from the Corla, and many of you will recall the debates we had about making that, but also, of course, from the strong political and official support for the project. But what an advertisement for our archaeological offering, and I think the Corla should take its share of the credit for that. Moving on through the report, housing services, the information is there. You will note 6.7, we are undertaking a procurement exercise to appoint a new managing agent for the Energy Efficient Scotland scheme. That's welcome news. It's a pity that we had to go through that process, but we are moving it on as quickly as possible. Economic development, quite a lot of information there at paragraph 611 to 622. I won't go through them, but as you can see, a lot of activity going on there, and RCGF projects moving through the system as well. Energy unit, again, a very busy period to say the least. The good news I can bring you there is that I've just been advised a few minutes ago that Ofgem will now authorise timely replacement of the Skye to UIST subsea cable, subject to some business case clarifications, but that sounds very good news indeed, and not least as a result of a lot of activity by this Corla. The leader and I raised that and a number of issues at the UK Islands Forum in Orkney at the start of October, at which Ofgem was present, and of course we hope to receive other news very shortly on the transmission link. Planning service update there. The service is under pressure, as you know, but hope at this time of year, sometimes applications fall away and allow a bit of time to catch up. But you heard a lot about that at Sustainable Development Committee yesterday. The growth deal is subject to a separate report. And with that, Chair, I think those are the highlights. I will try to deal with any questions I can, and if I can't, I'll pass them on to the Deputy Chief Executive. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. And just to echo your comments about the UIST Virtual Archaeology Project, excellent work going into developing that, and it's receiving the recognition that it richly deserves. So it's really good to see, and excellent news from Ofgem today. Hopefully, we'll be getting better news or further good news on December 15th. Any questions or comments from members? Councillor Hussain.
Just a comment. I mean, that's very good news to hear about the subsea cable, and I think congratulations to the call and to everybody that put in effort to. Just talking about economic development, I think at the beginning there was a working group for the UC Economic Task Force to be revived again. Just wondering, is there anything, has that been, because I haven't seen any calls of meetings, programs, or any members being appointed.
I'll bring the Chief Executive in.
I can't advise directly on that, Chair, but I'll ensure that an answer is provided.
From my point of view, I've mentioned it to the Deputy Chief Executive, and he is aware that we're looking to have a meeting soon. So it's on the radar. Any other further questions or comments? Councillor McNeill.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Councillor Hussain actually stole my question, but considering a lot of the archaeology work just started off with the used economic task force where the original presentations were patched, and it was kind of taken from there. I think it's very important that the task force working group work is continued. There are a few projects that are halfway between. I would encourage you to get that sorted out and really good news as regards the of Jim Keenan.
Thank you, Councillor McNeil. We were losing you a bit towards the end there. You're quite quiet, but just I'd like to offer you your personal thanks. I think you were instrumental in pushing this project forward, especially through the task force. So I think that it shows the merits of having that working group that took that forward as well, or highlighted the possibilities. So thank you personally for that.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? No. In that case, do members agree to note the reports? Thank you. Item 7, this report is about the draft digitalisation strategy and the feedback received from the consultation on the draft digitalisation strategy. So the strategy has been updated to reflect comments received where appropriate, and approval is sought for the updated strategy. The revised strategy is detailed at Appendix 1 to the report, and the summary of consultation responses is at Appendix 2 to the report. Charlene McMillan will answer any members' questions on this.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so thank for consultation as agreed from last committee, and feedback received was quite minimal, but overly supportive and constructive. And as you mentioned, where possible, we've included the comments to update the strategy. So happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from members? No? Okay. Is there someone? Is there someone there? Councillor Murray, you want to come in there, or was that? No. Okay. Thank you very much. That is for approval. Yeah, that's for approval. Members approve. Thank you. Thanks, Charlene. Item 8, Public Bodies Climate Change Duties Compliance Reporting for 2021 to 2022. So this report seeks approval to submit the completed Public Bodies Climate Change Duties Compliance Reporting template, which is appended to the report to the Scottish Government, and seeks to provide an overview of the Cornish progress on climate change, covering governance, emissions and projects, climate change adaptation, procurement and wider influence across the local authority area. Anna Hume will answer members' questions. Anna.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the Firle is required to report on our compliance and progress on climate change annually, and it's looking to collect progress on climate change across all services, covering both progress within the Corla on our own estate, as well as our wider influence within the islands. So within our wider influence, we've recently been working with the Community Planning Partnership to develop the case for action and climate rationale for the Outer Hebrides. And we also have our own climate change strategy, which we'll be looking to implement with a view to improving our performance with regards to climate change. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Anna. Any questions or comments from members? No. Okay. Thank you very much. Do members, sorry, there's a recommendation for approval at 3.1. Do members agree to approve? Thank you. Thanks, Anna. So item 9 is the report providing information in relation to amendments made to the Cornish Draft Gaelic Language Plan for 2022 to 2027, following a 6-week period of public consultation. The draft Cornish Gaelic Language Plan with amendments made is available in both English and Gaelic versions as detailed in the appendix to the report. And Chief Executive will answer members' questions.
Very briefly, Chair, before I hand over to Donald Weir, Gaelic Policy Officer, I'm very pleased to be able to present the draft language plan. A lot of work has gone into this. I think it's been supplemented by, if I may say so, wise decisions from Committee na Gaelic in recent weeks to support our stated aims on Gaelic by way of policy implementation. As you've said, we have there were a few amendments suggested to the plan, not very many, and we have incorporated these wherever possible. But I'll ask perhaps Mr. Weir to give a little more detail. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Mr. Weir.
Wel, yna hys sio bortiach at fysrach ag nhw ahorach i yn bydrach plan y can yn y cwrle. Da fil y ffychyd sy'n ga, go da fil y ffychyd sy'n siach. Chai entwch ag cynnyw committee na garig siach of la ichyd dian tŵlting. Yn jay sia siach yn yw'n jay pwch ag ffoblach. Mae'r horag ar sio chai ahorach i yn bygge y bobl y chai chwrs is stiach yn drach. Is nacht tŵg bwy fôr pwynt yn grif sy'n darg. So nas yn ywch hwyr y bwrchyd sti gen i ffatr y flanne, mae'r flanne bladger y fag yma ffeimo ag sfregoch o sy'n y dwling a ha ro galig.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weir. Any questions or comments? I don't see any lights on. So there's recommendation for approval. Oh, sorry, Councillor McSween.
Tapelat. I mae'r carichydd Committee na Gaelig agus cyffalcha y flan sio agus a mi smynioch y gyrru nw pwynt gyda mi son ianw se gyfel Chan la chwn jyffyr defiach gyhigdyn y Gaelig, ha Gaelig y tortor arach y dysdiach gan y helan na sio agus go colyn iawn siar agus ha mi smynioch y gyfel a cwtrwmoch gyfel eisiau praddfa y stioch as yn hiwmar a sio agus gyfel clac ag na Gaelig diolch mae'r ffarst gan y nobod afystioch acyn agus hadd fi'n aholwch ysgwrs yn yw sy'n ie cloentyn of ik agus bail y clach gyda chan agus gyrru rwt nadroch chan i rwt môr a hawn i jar mor sôn chan i lacwyd bach edd obydd comedi sy'n ei rwt acwyd bach edd obydd comedi sy'n y microphones a chan i lacwyd jyfys ym i deing chan a sy'n bri yn hyn so diolch son tain cwrt ga dyn son fi clach gyda Alex am yn os gylliensyn tablof.
More than tank. They're doing some big Gaelic, not quite there, getting there slowly. So it's really good to hear people speaking in the chamber. And the only comment I would make, Councillor McSween, is when you're talking online, we can't quite hear the translation. So if you could lower your voice slightly, that would help.
I'm afraid that is not very easy for me.
I'm sorry, it's already been agreed and minuted. So okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor McSween. Any other questions or comments from members? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Donald. Finance and Policy, item 10 is the budget update. And this report provides a further update to the current position on the coroner's financial position and budget strategy for the 2-year period 2022 to 2024, following meetings of the Budget Board on 26th and 27th October 22 and the 22nd of November 22. The table at Appendix 1 to the report sets out the service areas submitted for discussion by the Chief Executive, Directors and Heads of Service, which proposals were and were not recommended for further discussion at this time. The Budget Board noted that the sum identified for further consideration was insufficient to bridge the estimated financial gap for 2023-24 and that further areas of service would require to be considered between October 22 and budget setting in February 2023. The current projections show an underlying deficit of 2.9 million in the current year, increasing to 6 million in 2023-24. This is not a sustainable position and immediate plans need to be put in place to address this budget gap. So Malcolm Burr and Norman MacDonald will answer members' questions. Malcolm, you start, then we'll bring Norman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware that members have read the material within the report and have had it presented on a number of occasions, both to the Budget Board and to the members' seminar. So I will be brief. But this is the first time, I think, that the report has appeared in the public domain. So I think it's important that we highlight certain points in it. Among these, inflation currently running about 11%. That will take 1.1 million in the course of this financial year. The cost of the pay deal, which is in place for most groups other than teachers and chief officers at the moment, is around 3.3 million. We will receive 1.7 million back from Scottish Government to assist us with those costs. But you can see that what we had left over for this year has been consumed to a fair extent by both inflation and by the pay deal. And the key point to note, I think, on the executive summary there at 2.3 is the Budget Board noted that the sum identified for further consideration, now those are the savings which were put forward and accepted by the Budget Board for a further look, were insufficient to bridge the estimated financial gap, and that we would require to look at further areas of service. I'll come back to that in a moment. Turning to paragraph 8, which sets out the climate in which we are operating. All we have at the moment in terms of government policy is our intelligence, which tells us that Scottish public finances are under severe strain, and a line in the Resource Spending Review, which was published in May, and that said local government core funding would remain static. That's flat cash, doesn't take account of pay awards, doesn't take account of inflation over the next 3 years, which, to put it mildly, means a significant real terms reduction. COSLA's response to that you've all seen, and the response of government and COSLA has been to ensure as far as we can that there is maximum flexibility within councils to use government monies. Now, how that is to be followed through in practice has still to be determined. Initial indications are that that is a process of discussion per sector with Scottish Government, which personally I don't think will suffice in the long run. But at the moment, the commitment is to flexibilities. 8.4 is important there. That's the UK Chancellor's autumn statement, the Barnett formula and its consequences. Now, Scottish Government, interestingly, has indicated already that it will pass on the health consequentials, but it has been silent on education. And of course, we want to see these passed on to that sector, which is run by ourselves. But big caveat here for it all, the Scottish budget is not due to be published until 15th of December. And there's always about a week after that while we correct errors, work out all the details, work out the floor, work out SINA, all the rest of it. So we really won't know what the CORLA has until just before Christmas, or even potentially just into the new year. But the projections are not anticipated to be good. Now, reserves. Thankfully and necessarily, the CORLA has always adopted a policy of retention of reserves. Just to remind you, we have a policy of holding a minimum of 3.5 million of uncommitted reserves to mitigate against risks. As you know, we will look at that figure, but that is in a context in which risks are increasing, not decreasing. So if there is an adjustment to that, I don't think it will be substantial, and we will, of course, abide by the Section 95 officer's advice about the parameters of any review in that. Some good news there, which Norman MacDonald will explain in a moment on interest and loan charges. But 9.2 shows where we are. I mean, we are taking an additional 2.4 million to be funding from reserves, leaving only 2.5 to support future budgets. Now, look at the cumulative deficit hovering around 5 to 6 million, and that is the forecast budget shortfall for next year. And you can see at Appendix 1 the projections for future years. So moving to 10.1, just to remind you, we are assuming a council tax rise of at least 3%. That's way below inflation, but it is not easy to argue with Scottish Government that you need more money if you're not prepared to raise any yourself. And council tax, as taxes go, is one of the most progressive taxes around. 10.2 sets out our policy context. the political strategy around public service reform, and you've heard encouraging news at an earlier item there, phased use of reserves, and identifying further savings. The Budget Board has met on 4 occasions since we adopted that policy in September. The work is well underway. There's a table at Appendix 1 which sets out the service areas recommended for further consideration. That amounts to about 1.7 million, which is not insignificant given the reductions which the Corla has faced in recent years. We also have conducted a pretty rigorous review of earmarked reserves. And to cut a long story short there, that's set out in Appendix 2, and it shows funds of 2.8 million, which can be diverted for general use. Now, reserves, of course, can only be used once. Once they're gone, and we can't come back to them. Finally, on policy, at 11, we're looking to amend the policy of carry forward of 2% of budget underspends and 1% of budget overspends to be 1 and 1, i.e. services can carry forward 1%, but not 2%. And that is because we need every pound note for the general budget. So before I turn to recommendations and invite the Chief Finance Officer to come in, the key message in policy terms is that we need to retain a level of reserves, not for 23-24, but for 24-25. And we cannot, I think, wisely address next year's budget only. Otherwise, we will be looking at the annual deficit of 6 million plus having to be found in one financial year. And I think the Corla would find that, to say the least, very difficult. So moving to the recommendations, we're asking you to note the assessments set out. Those are from me and from the Chief Finance Officer. To note the estimated financial deficit set out in 10.1, to authorise me and Mr MacDonald to continue to prepare a draft budget. It's only a budget. It's for you to determine what the budget is, but we must prepare a draft budget now on the basis of the intelligence and the estimates which we have. There is no point wasting officer time if the Chamber is not committed to considering that option when it comes to budget setting in February. So, on what basis? Prepare the draft budget on the basis of the potential areas of savings set out in Appendix B. That's the work that the Budget Board did at the end of October. The review of the earmarked reserves at Appendix C. And of course, if you agree that today or next week, we will, of course, commence the usual impact, equality assessments, etc., because you can't take a competent decision in February unless that work has been done, but there is no point in doing it until this course of action is authorised by the Corla. You're not taking a final decision at this point, but it would be pointless to do that work without your authorisation. Finally, to note that we will, of course, continue to submit progress reports to the Budget Board, to member seminars as required, and of course this committee. And it's likely that we will arrange a meeting of one or all of these bodies in early January, once we know what is in the local government settlement, just either before Christmas or early in the new year. So that is the overview from me, Chair, and I think the committee should wisely now hear from Mr MacDonald and then you can address the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Executive. I'll now bring in Norman MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. I think the Chief Executive's covered most of the main points there, but just to try and put some figures and a summary of the figures. We're forecasting a deficit of 6 million for 23-24 at the moment. Obviously, these figures are subject to change. That's based on a flat cash settlement. We know that flat cash doesn't always mean flat cash, doesn't take account of inflation, and also doesn't take account of government priorities, where they will divert funding to health and social care and education, etc., which means that the rest of the budget suffers. So the steps that the Chief Executive has mentioned, we've managed to close that gap of 6 million somewhat. The savings proposals of 1.7, which are shown in the appendix, heads of service have put these forward as achievable savings. Some of them are small amounts, but every little helps, as I say. We've looked at the earmark reserves. There are 2.8 million identified, but we have agreed that on the basis of some ideas that departments had put forward for the use of these reserves, that we would leave 500,000 of that for departments to be able to make a case for additional funding. So when we did the review, the results that came back showed that people had other ideas for using it, apart from the original idea for which the funding was set aside. So we thought that would be a good idea to let some of these very valuable projects proceed. A member will obviously have an input into deciding where that funding goes. The Chief Executive mentioned loan charges and interest savings. One of the positive aspects for us as a council of the interest rate increase, which is a problem for individuals, but as the council aren't in a borrowing position at the moment, we're gaining a lot of additional income on our investments. That also feeds into the interest on revenue balances, which the general fund receives from the loans fund. So in the current year, we're expecting to make savings of about 800,000 on that. Going forward to the budget that we're preparing at the moment, we expect to have about 500,000 of savings from that as well. It's difficult to say, obviously, how much we're going to have to invest at any time and how the interest rates are going to be, but it's looking as if interest rates will continue going up for some time yet. Inflation is obviously high at 11%. Our budget model, as usual, includes 2% for just general supplies and services. We had mentioned previously at Budget Board and at the seminar that if we don't get enough savings, we will go down the route of top slicing all budgets. So as an alternative to that, we're considering to look at a flat cash, I suppose, position for these budgets, small budgets like stationery, travel, subsistence, things like that, rather than give them inflation. See if they can manage with budgets that they have this year. So that we're expecting would save about 400,000 on, if we don't give inflation to everything. We're addressing the big items like utilities, oil, fuel in another way. So it's just general inflation on small items. So between all these factors, we've identified about 4.9 million to go towards the 6 million funding gap that we currently have. Obviously, if we can identify more savings, that's the way to go. But even with that, we would use 1.1 million of reserves to balance the budget. That would leave a little reserve still to feed into the 24-25 budget. But one of the points I would like to stress is the importance of making savings that are recurring. If we look at 23-24, we take the 1.7 million savings this year, our deficit in the following year will be 4.7. If we don't take these savings, our deficit in 24-25 will be 6.4 million. And the reserves will be depleted by that time. So the Comhairle would be faced with some very serious decisions with no reserves to fall back on. I think that's the main points, to be honest. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Norman. Do members have any questions or comments? Councillor Crichton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to repeat what I said at the seminar before about how important it is that we stick to the strategy that we've maintained over the last 10 years in terms of wisely and prudently using our reserves to cushion us against some of the worst cuts in local government history suffered by this council. And I think we should all heed the wise counsel from Norman and the Chief Executive about that and about the abyss we face in the 24-25 budget and beyond it is becoming so unsustainable now that it's going to take us to the brink of being reduced to, to statutory services, and worse than that, employment, really tough decisions, as Norman pointed out. So I think it's really important that we retain our nerve and that we move forward cautiously around our revenue budget choices. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Crichton. I agree entirely. I think it's worth acknowledging the work that's been done in previous terms and my predecessors. It's quite wise this choice been taken. Reserves, as the Chief Executive said, can only be spent once. And Norman's point there about if we don't take recurring savings, we're leaving an even bigger gap. So it's a bit of a false economy by using reserves, but we need to use them wisely and prudently. And for 24-25, it's vital that we still have something and some room to manoeuvre. I'll bring in Councillor McCormack.
Thank you very much, Leader. I'm not a member of this committee. I just wanted to, I'm quite happy with the strategy that has been laid out today and that we've discussed in the past. Quite happy with that. I just wanted to make reference to the discussions we had at education earlier this week on the subject of library provision and provision of appropriate staff for libraries. And I'm hoping that somehow or other there will be a suitable tweak in the budget to allow an appropriate staffing level in our libraries going forward.
Bring in the Chief Executive to respond to
that. Thank you, Chair. I mean, that is a matter for Education and Children's Services, and I will happily leave it there, but I will observe that that is one of the services which I think we all know has been, well, it has been the subject of political discussion in that the Chamber elected to support the mobile library provision over the static library provision, I think, in the knowledge that funds were limited. And it is now, we realise that the static library provision is somewhat diminished. I hear exactly what Councillor McCormack says, and we hear what was said at Education and Children's Services Committee yesterday. But 2 points. It's easy for me to say the savings on that would have to come from somewhere else within that budget, and that is true. But by way of some comfort, that is why the Chief Finance Officer and I have identified or have recommended that you support identification of around £500,000 out of the earmarked reserves for such urgent matters that we simply need to take forward. That fund is there for a purpose. It's at a figure that is meaningful, and it allows, within this context of few options, some flexibility in what the Corla does, and that I think has to be the realistic assessment from the officer perspective. But we hear very much, of course, what has been said in support of the library service. We all want to support that service because it has been the subject of reductions, again approved by this chamber, of course, in previous years. But we have to ensure that we have a viable library service. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Not necessarily approved by me, but the point I would make, I understand the point that the Chief Executive is making, but certainly I should think that two posts at least should probably still be in the education budget. I'm hoping anyway. Well, certainly the most senior post I think is still in the budget. So it may not be a very significant sum of money, but I just would like to make sure that there is sufficient money there to make sure we have a proper service. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Angus. Any other questions or comments from members? Don't see any lights on or hands up. Councillor Murray, were you wanting to come in? What was in the digitalisation strategy? Apologies. IVs be seen as a hub for supporting those at risk of digital exclusion.
True.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, so I'm just reading the comment Councillor Murray's put up. Yes, I think that'll be taken into account.
Yes, it's called Library and Information Services.
Yeah.
Chair, for a reason.
Yeah.
indeed.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councillor Gordon Murray.
Thanks a lot, Chair, and thanks for the report, and thanks for the clarification that we're not really making a decision just now. That'll be left for February. Just 2 points really. When do you expect us to get the impact assessments on these savings proposals? And the other thing I was going to mention was the strategy, which I welcome from yourself, Leader, was that you would look at manifestos and leaflets of all councillors and try and bring that together into some sort of steer as to where we're going with that. The other thing I was going to mention was the BVAR mentioned that we were not performing in certain indicators. Is the budget going to be used to address that as well? Thanks.
I'll bring the Chief Executive in to answer those points, and then I'll come back myself. Okay.
On the latter point, on the BVAR indicators, not necessarily, Chair. I think that's a matter for the chamber, but certainly the advice will be that these indicators have to be looked at pretty carefully, and that's not an excuse for anything. It is simply saying the Corner will always, for example, score very badly on public parks because there is only one, and it's in Stornoway. So if you're in other parts of the islands and you're asked, are you happy with the public park provision? Because you don't have one, you're very likely to say, I'm not at all happy because we don't have it. Also, our leisure facilities accessible to me. Well, if you're in Uig or if you're in Eriskay, possibly not. It's quite a long distance to travel to a leisure facility. So I think we have to be very careful about these broad brush Scottish Household Survey types questions for our area. But it is for you to prioritise the services, and you will have to prioritise services. That is the whole message of this report. I think the Budget Board, from the officer perspective, is to be commended for doing so on those 2 days in October when it went through service reductions offered up reluctantly, of course, but honestly by heads of service, and said, this we are prepared to look at reluctantly. This is a bridge too far. So that is the prioritisation that takes place. I think we have come up with suggested reductions totaling 1.7 million, and Budget Board has given a green light not to implement them, but to take them forward as part of the budget planning process. Others, it has said, no. This is too much. This is not what we want to see. So that is the policy prioritisation I think that is required, looking at the whole budget rather than looking at external indicators, valuable though these are. And of course, I've talked so much, Chair, I've forgotten the first question. The impact assessments. Yeah. If Norma Skinner is on the call, she can perhaps answer that more in a more detailed way than I, but usually they take a matter of weeks. I'm thinking 3 or 4 weeks from implementation, depending on the complexity of the budget line. But they would be available if you approve these recommendations for consideration by the Budget Board seminars or special P&R in January.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I hope I've answered these questions.
Yeah, I'll come back to the middle question shortly, but are we happy with those 2 responses, Gordon?
Yes, Chair. The impact assessments, maybe it's just vocabulary, but they would come before the decision, before implementation.
Yes. Yes.
We would get them before the budget meeting, yeah.
Yes, you can't, the Chamber cannot take a competent decision without having regard to the impact assessments, and indeed officers may have to say, that which we thought we could recommend to you, we now can't because of the impact assessment.
It's happened before, though. I know it's happened before, that we've taken a decision without an impact assessment in a budget 3 years ago.
I couldn't possibly comment on that, Councillor Murray, but the point being, if agreed today, we're talking possibly about 3 weeks. So that would take us to early January before we'd have the impact assessments back. In terms of your question about drawing together manifestos and commitments, it's a timely reminder for members who haven't shared them, if they could share them with me. I've pulled quite a few together, so thanks for those who have. And yes, we'll take that through the process and what members' priorities are. But I just want to commend the work that's been done through the budget board and the seminar as well. Good engagement, and it's giving a steer for members to get, for officers to get us to this point in terms of developing the budget and taking it forward. So I think we're on the right track. And thanks everyone who's been involved and taken part. So I think that answers your question, Councillor Murray, I hope.
I couldn't possibly comment.
Okay, thank you, Gordon. Any other questions or comments? I've seen Francis Murray came online briefly there. No. Okay. Thank you very much. So there's a recommendation for approval at paragraph 3.1 to the report. Do we approve? Great, thank you. Item 11, this report is for noting and provides an update on the progress of the 2018 to 23 capital programme as at 30th September 2022. The appendix to the report shows the detail at project level on progress with the delivery of the programme, and Norman MacDonald will answer members' questions.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have much to add to the report itself. It's the last year of the programme, and in line with previous programmes, only projects that have commenced are usually carried forward to the next programme. So any other projects that are still on the appendix, we will review all these and we'll prepare a list, and it'll be for members to decide how to allocate that funding, whether projects are recommitted in the new programme or whether the money is reallocated. But we'll report back on that in either January or the report at the meeting in February.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, any comments or questions for Norman? No, in that case, that's for noting. Agreed. Item 12 is second quarter revenue monitoring, and the report is for noting again and provides detail of the Cornish forecast revenue outturn for 22-23. A summary of the financial performance to the end of September 22 is appended to the report. Departments are currently projected to be within carry forward tolerances at the end of the year. An exception report on budgetary performance is also appended to the report. All services have been impacted by the rapid increase in inflation, with the main cost pressures being electricity, heating oil and fuel for vehicles, which is estimated to cost an additional 1.1 million in the current financial year. We have Norman again to answer members' questions. Norman.
Thank you, Chair. Again, there's not much to add. I think we covered most of this at the beginning of the budget report, because it all ties in with what we're doing for the current year budget as well. Like you said, it's the inflation. The inflation costs are the main thing, 1.1 million, and the pay award. The net cost to the pay award of the pay award was about 1 million. But it's important to note as well that the teacher pay award still hasn't been agreed. So depending on what happens with that, I think the other unions have a clause in the agreement that if they aren't happy with the award for teachers, there's a reopen clause for that. Yeah. So there's always a risk there about the extra pressure on pay. As we mentioned before, one positive impact of the interest rates for us is the increased interest income, which is in the current year expected to get us about 800,000 or 900,000 pounds, which obviously goes a long way to offset the costs of inflation. The impact on reserves of all that is that we'll have about 3.5 million left at the end of the year to help towards the budget process. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Norman. Any questions or comments from members? No, and that is for noting. Thank you. Item 13, report is for noting and provides a summary report of the Treasury management activity during the first 6 months of 2022-23. The Treasury management strategy for 22-23, which was approved by the Corlia on 10th March 22, included the recommended prudential indicator estimates for the year. The indicators have been updated to reflect the changes to date and are shown at paragraph 10 of the report. And again, Norman will answer members' questions. Norman.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a standard report showing the activities during the year. Over the last few years, our activity has mainly been investment. We haven't been in a borrowing position. So it's mainly about the investments and the interest. And as stated in the previous report, there's savings of 380 and loan charges, but then there'll be additional savings from the interest gained by the general fund. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Norman. Any questions or comments from members? No. Okay, that's again for noting. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Donald. Mr. Crichton.
Just on that, do you have local authorities invest their money in us?
Trying to think, do we have any at the moment? No, because we're not borrowing. We're not borrowing at the moment, so they don't invest with us, but we invest with other local authorities.
Very wise of them.
Thank you, Councillor Crichton. Item 14. Sorry, that was for noting, so I think it was agreed to be noted. Thank you. This report seeks approval for a change to the council tax on empty homes policy regarding discounts on long-term empty properties undergoing significant structural repair. The discounts that can be applied are dictated by the regulations, and this is not intended as a complete review of the policy. The proposed change addresses specific issues which members wish to be reviewed. And again, Norman MacDonald will answer members' questions. Norman.
Thank you, Chair. As you said, this wasn't intended as a full review of the policy. As you can see from the report, there's been various tweaks to the policy since it was implemented in 2013. This change was proposed to address an issue raised by members, whereby properties which were long-term empty but hadn't changed ownership weren't getting a discount when the house was being significantly improved. So this puts it on the same footing as a property that had changed ownership, gives them the same discounts, same periods.
Okay. Any questions or comments from members? Okay, I see no hands. All right, so these are recommendations for approval at paragraph 3.1. Do we approve? Okay, approved. Thank you. Item 15, write-off of debts. This report recommends that a number of irrecoverable debts be written off, totaling £27,668.82 in respect of council tax, sundry debts and housing benefit overpayments. Every effort has been made by officers to recover the debts due, and write-off recommendations are made only when all recovery routes have been exhausted. And Jennifer MacLeod will answer members' questions. Jennifer. Any questions from members? No. Okay. In that case, recommendations for approval at paragraph 3.1 of the report. Approved. Thank you. And item 16 is the growth deal for the island. So this report seeks approval for the Cornwall to enter into full deal agreement with Scottish and UK governments for the island's growth deal, through delegation of authority to the Islands Growth Deal Joint Committee to approve on the Cornwall's behalf the terms of the full deal agreement, and to seek approval of proposals to manage change within the Islands Growth Deal and outline potential approaches for managing the funding profile over the 10-year Island Growth Deal period. And Malcolm Burr, Chief Executive, will answer members' questions.
Yes, Chair, just a couple of matters to bring to your attention. This is largely about the legal mechanism to conclude the full deal agreement, and the recommendations reflect these legal mechanisms, slightly complicated by the fact that the Corla is the accountable body for the whole deal, which brings additional responsibilities for us. So just to take you through what you've been asked to agree here, note that the growth deal is proposed to be signed on 20th of January 2023. That will take place, all being well, in Orkney. with senior representation from both UK and Scottish governments. And will be, as an event of some significance, I have to say I'm very pleased that we're able to make this recommendation, not just to the Corla, but also to Orkney Islands Council and Shetland Islands Council. It is some achievement of the team led by our own Anne Murray, the programme director, in bringing these business cases to the state in which they are. All of them need to be signed off by both governments. And here we are, not that long after approving these business cases. Here they are in a state where the full deal can be approved and, of course, finance can start to flow. So the mechanisms for that, I'm asking you to delegate authority to the Growth Deal Joint Committee. That's a joint committee, just for information. Consists of 6 elected members, 2 from each authority. We are represented by the leader and by the chair of Sustainable Development Committee. So we're asking you to delegate authority to the Joint Committee to approve on our behalf the terms of the full deal agreement, to delegate authority to me to conclude the agreement, just for the benefit of new members. Members can't bind the council. It has to be the proper officer. So in this case, that's myself, to conclude the deal agreement once approved by the Joint Committee. And I'm also seeking delegation to the Deputy Chief Executive as your representatives on the programme board, that's the Senior Officer Board, to agree any subsequent changes. Now, I'll come back to that in a moment, just so that you know what that is. Then to delegate authority to me to sign the financial agreement, that's actually the legally binding agreement. And because we are the accountable body for the whole deal, I have to sign it also on behalf of Orkney and Shetland. So that's the reason for that mechanism. Moving on to the funding, you're agreeing in principle, not a final decision, the growth deal spend profile be managed through each council, ensuring cash flow, or through the provision of bridging loans to growth deal projects. I'll come back to that in a moment too. That's an agreement in principle, but I think you will see that that makes sense. Finally, to note that we have, in addition to our own risks, we carry risks as accountable body, and these have been assessed by the Corla's Head of Law and Governance, and also, I should say, by the Section 95 officer. Mr. Langley and Ms. Murray are also here to answer any questions which I'm unable to answer, but I will take you to paragraph 7. That's the management of the financial profile. And the reason we are seeking the delegation, which we're looking for here, is it's notionally 10 million of the 100 million every year. Now, we all know the demands on that. It's not going to be projects don't come neatly in 10 million pound compartments. So we need flexibility to accommodate spend that may arise above or below the 10 million in any given financial year. And that, of course, is the reason for recommendation E, and also the reason for recommendation C, to delegate to me and to the Deputy Chief Executive any subsequent changes to the full deal agreement. That's not changing the projects. That's just dealing with the mechanism of delivery of the funding. And I think paragraph 7 sets that out in sufficient detail. Also paragraph 6.3, I should have said, because we have to work with 2 governments here and 2 other councils on the flow of the funding to make sure that everyone's projects are accommodated in the best possible way, but that might require financial adjustment throughout the 10 years. I'll stop there. If colleagues on the line, I know Anne Murray is on the call. If there's anything I've missed out, I would respectfully, through you, Chair, ask her to add anything that I've missed out before you turn to the recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Anne, would you like to come in and clarify any points?
No,
No.
I don't have anything to add to that. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. And Tim, you're okay. Any questions or comments from members? Councillor Racine?
I mean, in terms of being the accountable body, the caller for the deal, is there any governance implications, or obviously you highlighted some risk and in terms of responsibility for this body, so.
Yes, Chair, there is, but these are accounted for through the programme board, which consists of the senior officers of the three councils concerned and by the joint committee with the members. These are all constituted bodies. They all have their standing orders and rules of governance. So there is a complete, as it were, three council arrangement there, which runs parallel to the three councils. So we are everything is under control.
Thank you very much. Councillor MacDonald?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. I was asked by a wise and perceptive fella before I came into this chamber a question which I'm sure we'll all be interested to hear the answer to. £100 million deal, and we spoke earlier on, I think you mentioned yourself, severe real terms reductions due to inflationary pressures, etc. What, by the time we start spending this money, will the £100 million have been reduced to by the time we get to round to using it usefully?
I think I'll give the answer I think you would all expect, Chair, which is not as much. Inflation will eat away at that capital sum. Before we look at the list of projects and think, you know, what's not happening here. Of course, it is a very long-term capital programme. It's a 10-year programme that rather than our usual 5, and of course many of the projects are dependent on other funding, so that there would always be an element of uncertainty, I suppose, as to whether all of these projects or some of them would receive the external funding that would enable them to go ahead. But inflation is absolutely another unwelcome variable in all of this. I don't think I can put it stronger than that.
We've no recourse to go back to Scottish Government or governments and say we're not getting as much for our original deal as we were hoping. We can't make that case.
You will be pleased to know, Chair, that we have asked the question, but the answer is the deal is the deal is the deal. And I'm seeing Ms. Murray nodding there.
We've asked already. Okay, any other questions or comments from members? No. In that case, recommendations for approval are paragraph 3.1. Approved. Thank you. Thank you very much. So item 17 will be taken in private at the end of the meeting. And capital programme, item 18, Barrenvatrsey Community Campus. So this report provides an update on matters associated with the development and delivery of the Barrenvatrsey Community Campus development. Summaries of the updated programme and cost plan are provided in the report. The revised estimated total project cost has increased to 88.25 million, representing an increase of 4.69 million since August 2022, as detailed in the revised cost plan at paragraph 6.2 of the report. The revised delivery programme and key milestones published by Hub North Scotland in consultation with Robertson Construction were summarised in the report. And will it be yourself first or will it be Ian? I'll bring Ian McKinnon in to answer any questions. Ian?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. The committee will recall that notwithstanding the funding shortfall that we reported at September series, we had hoped to enable the instruction to be issued to Hub North to make a start on stage 2 of the development process in October. Unfortunately, certain delivery partners were not able to secure approval for their contribution to the necessary capital funding to enable that instruction to be issued in time, and indeed they still await that approval. So what we've done in the meantime is, as you said, we've taken a revised milestone date of the 16th of January 2023 as the revised planning assumption for the start of stage 2. And what that does is it has required us to develop a revision to the wider delivery programme, details of which are included at paragraph 5.4 of the report, and that has then generated a revised cost plan, details of which are included in paragraph 6.2. And as you've said, Chair, in your introductory comments, the cost of the project has increased from 83.5 to 88.2 million pounds. And that increase is wholly attributable to the impact of increased construction inflation in what will be a very much longer delivery period. And I suppose that particular point relates to the point that Councillor MacDonald was making just a few minutes ago in terms of how much bang for your buck you get from a certain sum of money. The delay in starting stage 2 has moved what we call financial close, which is the point at which we sign the contract with the contractor. That's moved from July 2023 to December 2023. And although that is a delay of some 5 months, it has actually moved the actual construction period by a total of 10 months due to the need for us to revisit the scheduling of the construction on Barra, including the enabling works at that time of the year. And as you've heard me say in the chamber quite a number of times already, the construction market continues to be extremely volatile. And depending on who you listen to and what advice we take, the estimated project cost could continue to increase. It could level out, or it could even decrease, all in the period between now and when we are able to achieve financial close. And that's at the point at which we get a fixed price from the contractor and the risk around cost passes to them from us. For the purposes of our cost planning, the impact of construction inflation has been estimated using what are called the BCIS indices, which are published by the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors and is a nationally recognised and accepted approach. The shape of the market will or should become clearer in the medium to long term, but there's no doubt that in the short term, any further delays to the development process will continue to result in construction costs increasing further. But you can be assured that we continue to use the best information that we have available to us, that being the BCIS indices, and in any event, we would continue to advocate that we try to maintain progress into stage 2 as soon as possible. The report itself goes on to summarise the cost allocation process we are seeking to adopt and our ongoing discussions with the Scottish Futures Trust, who administer the Learning Estate Improvement Programme on behalf of Scottish Government, and from which we hope to secure a significant funding contribution towards the education and sports elements of the project. The report also summarises our current position regarding the submission of the outline business case for the healthcare element of the project to Scottish Government Health for its consideration by their capital investment group in mid-December, and that will be a significant milestone for the project. We don't expect to have approval from Health as quickly as we would like, but the least we could hope for is that forum would be able to give its approval to proceed to stage 2, and that, coupled with the authority delegated by yourselves to the Chief Executive at the last series, would enable us to move to stage 2 in the middle of January. And it's following on from that, or it's using that planning assumption that gives us a revised delivery programme and the cost plan. The final section of the report highlights the fact that the most significant risk facing the project continues to be the cost of its construction in the current market. And in the event that any alternative approach is required, for example, a plan B, we would suggest that a number of key principles be retained in their entirety. And these have been attributes that we set at the beginning of the development process, and we really want to retain going forward. First of all, it's all about place-based investment. Secondly, it's about public service integration for Barra and Battersea. Thirdly, it's a collaborative approach involving not just ourselves, but the Health Board, HHP and Police Scotland and others in the procurement and the operation of new facilities, all resulting in a single community campus. And if there is any consideration of disaggregation or alternative approaches, we would strongly submit that it be limited to the adoption of a more phased approach to the delivery of the project, retaining its current scope, layout, design and specification, and that being dependent on the availability of sources of funding in the coming years. So the recommendation that the Comorla note the report and support the Health Board's submission of the healthcare OBCs at paragraph 3.1. And given that the next series of meetings of yourselves is not until February next year, Health's Capital Investment Group is to meet in mid-December, and there are at least 2 meetings of the Project Executive Board scheduled in that period. We would be happy to provide members with any further updates in the intervening period by email.
Thank you, Archie, and I'll bring in the Chief Executive briefly.
Thank you, Chair. I won't add to Mr. McKinnon's very full presentation there, and you can see that the Comorla is driving this project forward absolutely as quickly as we can. The Project Executive Board meets on a monthly basis. We will continue with the meeting scheduled on 21st of December, obviously to receive the report from the NHS Capital Investment Group the week before. But just to add to Mr. McKinnon's point, it may be, and I hope it will be necessary for this committee to review and perhaps to reach conclusions about the next phase before the next series of meetings at the end of February. In many ways, I hope that's the case. Although, as Mr. McKinnon said, you have already delegated to me to approve the Comorla moving to stage 2 when we consider it right to do so, and liability is clearly shared out among the partners. So we will do that without delay and of course advise you in one form or another. But in many ways, I hope that the committee will be required to reconvene to move this forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. When I was reading it, I was struck by the length of the term and the exposure that is within that. Just because of the length of time involved, we don't know what's going to happen in 10 years' time. So are there no financial instruments that are available to us to mitigate those risks or to give us more certainty round about costs?
Mr. McKinnon, hold on 2 seconds. Sorry, Kenneth, could you put your microphone on?
There's no instruments as such. I mean, the uncertainty in terms of well, there's two main variables to establishing the cost plan. One is the cost itself, and because of a number of factors which you've heard me talking about a number of times already, the cost is very high at the moment. The other thing that makes it even more difficult to manage is that we have very little means of ensuring the certainty of that cost going forward. The market at the moment is incredibly volatile. We have heard from some sources that it is going to get worse. We are hearing from other sources that it is going to get better. At the moment, all we can go with at the moment is the BCIS indices and the general intelligence that's out there. I can't even say whether the figures that we've got here are going to be the worst case scenario or they're the best case scenario. To make things even more challenging is that the funding package for the project comes from a whole series of different areas, and each area treats construction inflation in a different way. So as was just described under the last item there, our contribution from the capital programme, £9.9 million. It was £9.9 million 5 years ago. It's still £9.9 million. And what the bang that you get for that buck is less than it would have been 5 years ago. On the other hand, the funding source from Scottish Government Health actually has provision for inflation. So what we can do is, by identifying what the impact of construction inflation is, Scottish Government Health makes an increased contribution to the healthcare element of the project. So it's trying to bring all these things together. I don't know whether I've answered your question or just made things even more complicated, but it is quite a complicated process. But undoubtedly, the biggest risk to the project is not only the high cost of construction on Barra as we see it just now, but the lack of certainty around that cost going forward.
Thank you. Would you like to come back, Susan? You're happy? Yeah, okay. Councillor McLean, would you like to come in?
Hi there. I just recently have been speaking to folk on Barra, and obviously things are getting quite heated, and folks are getting quite frustrated now. Just for context, in case anyone here isn't aware, it was back in 2003 our hospital was effectively condemned by the now First Minister, but then Secretary of Health Nicola Sturgeon on Barra. So that's almost 20 years we've been waiting for some parts of this project. Well, people on I think a fair few people now understand that most of the work from the council side has been done. We're just waiting to basically get onto stage 2. There's a call for, well, I would stress to maybe an officer be sent down or a rep be sent down to explain this to the community, just to sort of alleviate fears, because yeah, just there's no real question. It's more just a statement. I'm just expressing to the chamber, you know, folks in Barra are getting quite worried and quite agitated, and I know it's not necessarily council's fault, but yeah. I would stress somebody go down to Barra to hold a public meeting just to explain things. It might not be a nice truth, it might not be a nice thing to say to them, but it still needs said. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for bringing the Chief Executive. Thank you.
Well, Chair, having just returned from Barra and conducted a series of meetings with quite a number of groups, I have to say I met complete understanding about the position in which the project was. Now, admittedly, that was understanding about the Corla's position as regards the project's delivery, and frustrations were perhaps in respect of other services comprised in the project. But I think our communication with the Barra and Vatersay community has been as good as it could have been. I mean, we can always provide more, but what I sought to do a couple of weeks ago, and I think achieved, was to explain the processes involved, which are frustrating. I agree. It is, if one is ever doing a lessons learned of this one with Scottish Government, it is unfortunate, to say the least, that we have parallel processes going on when what is clearly required is one decision-making process for projects of this kind. I should say, colleagues on the education side of Scottish Government and in Scottish Futures Trust have been very, very good indeed in moving forward what needs to be taken forward. It is the one sector which is a key sector, and that's NHS, which has its own processes for approval of capital projects. And I did think that was well understood, but we always bear in mind that communication is let's say, is an immediate priority. And if at the moment there is an update to give, Mr. McKinnon and I will give it. I hope that's reassuring.
Thank you. I'll bring in Mr. McKinnon.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just to reassure Councillor McLean that in parallel to us providing the Corla with a regular update for the last 3 or 4 years now, what I will be doing after this meeting is making, we have what's called the Community Stakeholder Advisory Group on the island, which is made up of representative bodies, including the community councils, Voluntary Action Barra and Battersea. That's the one. Yeah, that's not. And quite a number of other representative bodies on the island. So I'll be making contact with them, giving them a copy of this report. And as always, we've always put an article in Guvara as well, so that the wider public can get an understanding of where the project is at.
Thank you very much. Councillor McLean.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. I wasn't having a go at Malcolm when he was down last week or anything. It was I was at multiple multiple of the meetings myself. It was just more a general note from. Yeah, not everyone attends community councils. Not everyone attends meetings, and just you know, when I go to the Co-op and I'm stuck in there for an hour talking to folk, lots of people going, "What's going on? What's going on? What's going on?" And then I'm sort of hands are tied a wee bit. But an update on the GU would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor McNeil.
Thank you, Leader. I would just like to echo what Councillor McLean, you know, just to keep everybody in the loop more than anything else, and for reinsurances and regular updates. I would also seek for reassurance from the Cornish commitment to this project, because statements last week's got some hairs running that maybe the commitment wasn't there any further and the prices were getting a bit kind of scary. So I think that would be well dealt with before it becomes public knowledge that was even discussed in the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McNeil. Yes, it's I think our last capital programme, and the one before it was a commitment from the Corlia, and it is one of the leading capital investment. In fact, it will be the leading capital investment project going forward with Goat Hill and Lochmaddy nearing completion. It's probably the next one to be starting. So hope that reassures you. Any other questions or comments from members?
Thank you, Leader.
Great, thanks. Sorry, Dan. No, okay. In that case, the report is for noting, I believe. Yes, the report's for noting. So do we agree to note the report? Thank you. Item 19, this report details the current temporary mileage rate increases and confirms the arrangements for adjustment to the rate to take account of future fluctuations in fuel prices. The mileage rate was increased from 45 pence per mile to 56 pence per mile, and although fuel prices have begun to decrease, they remain volatile, and indications are that they are likely to rise again in the near future. It is therefore proposed that the current rate applies until 31st of March 2023, and the Chief Executive will answer any questions.
Yes, Chair, very, very briefly. You may wonder why this report is here, because it simply asks you to note, and I can, under my own delegation, review and adjust the mileage rate. I think the decision we took on that earlier in the year was very welcomed by employees, and rather to my surprise, we're one of, I think, only 2 councils which have taken that action. But the reason I bring it in front of you is that while it's for noting, it clearly has financial implications. They're not large, but every financial implication is significant in these times. So we will monitor these carefully while reviewing the rates to take account of fuel prices. I may seek your authority in relation to what I will call quasi-council workers, such as those who work for us under contracts for services. That's been raised with me. In other words, people who we take on an agency basis, not commercially. I'm trying not to name groups here, but who also undertake mileage for us. And with your permission, I will look at these rates as well in relation to these individuals. So thank you for that, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, that makes sense. I think any questions or comments from members on the report? No. In that case, reports for noting. Do we agree to note? Thank you. Item 20, performance review, reports outstanding, and there are no reports outstanding in respect of this committee. So we now move into private for item 17. So if I could ask people who aren't meant to be here